want to thank you for having me today. First, I want to alert my dad, who's over here, that a minister friend of mine told me, one other time that I spoke, that no souls are saved after 20 minutes. So he's got to give me the heave-ho if I'm here longer than 20 minutes. So first, the reason why I'm focusing more on the individual than the games is because I guess it started back when I was a real young kid. My dad and I used to go to Yankee games, Yankee Indian games. We were big Yankee fans. We used to do that every year, and I think I was about 9 years old. It was 1970. We had gotten tickets. John Yackham, who everybody's aware of here, was good enough to arrange for some tickets at the old stadium in Cleveland. And so my dad and I took off, and those were the days of double headers, which they rarely have anymore, and that was like great. You could see 2 games in one day. So we leave, and it's pouring rain here. I mean, it is just teeming. And, you know, I had my Yankee hat on. I had the bill pulled way down over my eyes because I was afraid that, geez, we're not going to see a game. We're going to drive all the way out there and have to come back without seeing my favorites. And wouldn't you know, as soon as we got to Cleveland, the skies cleared, and it's a beautiful day. We had to wait for our tickets at will call. And as we're waiting for the tickets, me being a 9-year-old snot-nosed kid, decided to debate this adult woman on who was the better catcher, Duke Sims, whom you may remember, or Thurman Munson. Now, Thurman Munson at the time was a rookie in 1970, and this guy was like in an 0 for 35 slump to start the year. I think when we saw him, he was maybe had a couple hits, but he was like 0-53. And Duke Sims was nothing special, but he'd been in the major leagues for quite a while. So here I am, 9 years old, you know, talking about all these stats and how great Thurman Munson's going to be. We must have carried this on for 15 minutes. So finally our tickets came. My dad says, well, it's time to go. And I had my last word for that young lady. And we got through the turnstiles, and I hear a voice that says, son, wait a minute. And I turn around, and I look, and there's this other lady who had been standing to the side. And she said, well, thank you for your kind comments. I'm Mrs. Thurman Munson. So, like I said, I don't remember, I didn't remember much about the Bills-Oilers game. Well, I don't remember anything about that doubleheader. I mean, I was just floating along, and to this day, I still remember that vividly as if it happened, yesterday.
Our guest in our midst there, and Jack came last week. Kinky showed up, unfortunately. Fortunately, to listen to Jack, of course.
You said it correctly.
And as I was sitting next to him, and of course Russ had given me a lot of information about Kinky. I got pictures, etc. But I guess you're so young looking, I didn't realize you went so far back. So, you get us started chronologically and tell everybody how you got involved in.
Well, I guess the year was 1942. My brother and I lived a short distance from the ballpark on a street called Frink Avenue. So there was kink and pink on Frink. So, but coming to the ballpark was fun. And I got a job, and I was only about 10, probably 11 years old. And my first job was picking up pop bottles at the game. I always say that I was there in BC before cans. Everything was not bad, huh? All your soft drinks were in bottles, and when people got through with them in the bleachers, they would drop them down in between the seats down on the ground, and you had to be careful. You almost need a hard hat. But that was one of my jobs, picking up pop bottles, and to this day, I don't know how much we got. I can't even remember, but it had to be very minimal.
Did you work for Ben Kerner?
And I worked for Ben Kerner and his mother and his sister. And like Jack was talking a little bit about it, they were great people to work for. And I can remember Mrs. Kerner, a little bit of a lady with a real Jewish accent. And I don't know, it was because of World War II, but she called me P40. And P40, that's all my name was to her. So. And I got to be a vendor, going around the stands, of course, selling the wares. And before the games, we stood out in front of it was sometimes right where the people would come in, or outside on the sidewalk or in the walkway, selling scorecards and cushions. And we had a saying, we kind of made it up ourselves. I don't know who instituted it, but it was like this: get your lucky number scorecard, pencils, and cushions. The seats are hard and the cushions are soft. And I think the cushions cost you a dime. But you didn't buy them, you rented them. In other words, so when the game was over, your job was to pick them back up. And I don't think we lost very many. And so the vending, to go out selling like that was my start in my quote baseball career. And I became an usher, and most of the time I worked Section 5, which was the third base side of the grandstand. And that was one of my favorite places to work, because in the box in front where I stood, that's where Dick Sherman sat. Dick Sherman, of course, was a great baseball fan. And he always, 2 or 3 times during the game, he would give me the money to go get some hot dogs or popcorn, and always I got hot dogs and popcorn. So that was a great place to work. And back then, back in the 40s and even in the early 50s, I thought the fans were great. I mean, they lived and died Jamestown Falcons. And they were great fans. I mean, of course, a lot of the people that go to the games had the ball players living in their homes, and so they became part of their family. And we had a lot of diehard fans. And I just, read in the paper the other day where Grace Barstow passed away. That was Claire Barstow's widow. And Claire Barstow was he was a great baseball fan. And she just died here now, and she was like 91 or 92. But she and her husband were great baseball. They sat on the first base side as a rule, because that was, at that time, they used to be the home team. It was later on that they changed over to third base dugouts. But I worked under, as far as the general managers, I worked under Mark Hammond, Cedric Tallis, and I don't think I worked for Jerry, but I knew Jerry from Jerry Lawson I'm talking about. But those two people, Mark Hammond and Cedric, and John Moss. John Moss came up from the South, I think from South to North Carolina. And I think eventually he became president of the Western Carolina League, John Moss did. But I can remember one of my jobs when I became office boy. Of course, the office boys, you ran all the errands and you did this, and one of the jobs was to pull out the tickets that season ticket holders had. In other words, you pulled those out before they went on sales. Well, one time I forgot to pull the tickets out, and we sold tickets that had already been sold. In other words, Joe Blow had bought a season ticket for a seat, and that ticket we had sold. Well, it might have been my shortest career, but it worked out all right. But that was bad. That was bad. That only happened once. But
all it would happen.
Yeah, that's all it would happen. Yeah. But those were great days. We had fans like Dick Sherman and Al Lenningers and John Albright. John Albright was a veneer salesman, and he came up from the South, but he was a great baseball fan. Maybe a little loud at times, a little sometimes obnoxious, but he was a great baseball fan. We had people like that. I mean, they lived and died baseball. And I think I touched on this a little bit before when Jack Gallagher spoke, that there were times that people would come down to the park like 4:30, 5 o'clock and lay a blanket out on their seats, and then they'll come back later. I mean, paid their ticket later, but so they'd have those seats because the parks were filled. I mean, they were just, because there was nothing really else to do. There was gas rationing, there was the war, there wasn't, we did not have the Little League, Babe Ruth League and that, so people came to the ballpark. And ball players stayed here a whole year. It was very seldom that a ball player got called up from Pony League up to another league. I mean, they stayed the whole season. now today, when a ball player shows development, they move him up, and I guess that's only fair to the young man that's going. But you got to know the ball players, and names like Don Chappie played third base, and eventually became a pitcher. He was a great. I mean, people fell in love with the guy. And John Newman, who was the Babe Ruth of the Pony League. But Clem Koshorik, who eventually married a Faulkner girl, I believe, played shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Jackie Schultz from West Seneca, remember him? He played the outfield. I can't tell you years, and sometimes I lose track of years, but he was only about 16 years old, 17. Nellie Fox was only 16 when he came here. Very popular, and of course, then he made it in the major leagues. Died at a young age, and when he was, he might have been out of baseball, but he died very young.
Let's stop at Nellie Fox here for a second. When he was here, was he considered a prospect?
I think so. I think they were pretty high on him. I think he was only, like I say, 16 years old, and he played center field. And one of these guys that you got attached to. I remember another ball player now, Frank Bowling, played under Tony Lupien. Both he and his brother both ended up in the majors, Frank with Detroit and Milt with Boston. But Frank Bowling was just a nice, down-to-earth guy. Played second base, and I got to see him play when I was in the service. I was stationed in South Carolina, and Fort McClellan in Alabama, from Alabama, that Vinegar Ben Mizell and Frank Bowling, and there were several other big ball players. So I got to meet Frank again. Many years had elapsed, but he played with Detroit, and all I can say, it was just fun to go to the games. Remember, the umpire I don't remember now, but we had an umpire that got married at home plate back in the mid 40s, maybe early 50s, and I can't tell you who that was. Do you know, Bob? Lefty? It was an umpire that got married at home plate. He was not, and his wife was not from here, but they were married here at home plate.
I know that there was one umpire that had 7 kids. No, I can't.
And then he got married?
Well, that's the way it works now.
I can't tell you the man's name, but I remember that was a big event. Married at home plate. Usually see, sometimes a ball player will do that.
Yeah.
But we hear an umpire doing it, and why he picked Jamestown, I don't know. But that was a big event.
What about exhibition games?
All right, we had, and I'm a little vague on this. I think the Tigers came here and played, and Dizzy Trout was here, and out in left center field, Ideal Taxi had a sign, and it was upside down, and I could still see Dizzy Trout standing on his feet up in the air on his head, looking at that phone, at the phone number. Everything was upside down, so I could see why they called him Dizzy. But yeah, the Tigers were here and played an exhibition game, and like I say, dates I can't tell you, but it was during the time that Dizzy Trout was in his heyday. I guess I could say he had him named right. And we had Buffalo. Buffalo came down a couple of times and played exhibition games.
Did the Blacks team come through?
I can't remember now. That doesn't, it could very well be, but I don't remember. But I remember the Tigers being here. And we had some umpires that went out of Pony League to major leagues, and Nestor Shylock, unusual name, Nestor, but he made it into the majors, and there might have been others, but I remember Shylock. And I remember sometimes the police were called down to the game to escort umpires off because there was some calls that didn't go one way or the other. We had and that got to be nervous time a little bit, but I don't remember anybody ever being arrested, but there's been times it was pretty hot and heavy with the fans, because the fans were really die-hard fans. I mean, I think we still have die-hard fans, but back in those days it was just like I say, everybody lived and died baseball.
Jerry Klein.
Jerry Klein. Jerry Klein, he was a showman. He started out as a vendor. I think he could outsell anybody, no matter what he was selling. But he ended up being the bus driver for the Falcons for a good number of years after that. But he was a vendor at the ballpark, and he was an institution. He really was.
What was his background?
I really don't know what Jerry had done in his day. Do you know, Jack?
They had a taxi company called Flying Taxi.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about that. He did have.
His favorite player was Myron Ginsburg.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Paisan.
Yeah. Myron Ginsburg, right? Who played in the majors. He was from Baltimore, I believe, but he played a short time in the majors. I was looking at a picture that I had at home, and I brought it to you today, Greg. 1943. Most of those ball players I couldn't name, but one that stood out in my mind was a catcher by the name of Floyd Southard, and he married a local girl here, and then he married Hultquist's daughter, and he was killed in an automobile accident. He was a big, right?
They called him Tex.
I think so. Yes, right. Yeah. Another catcher that comes to mind was Sid Ford. He was from Tennessee.
Old Hickory.
Old Hickory, right. And he was the kind of guy, he caught the game, hot day, got into the clubhouse, put his clothes on, never took a shower. He just went out. I remember that about it. And of course the clubhouse then was, I'm trying to think, but it isn't where it is now. I think
Under the stand.
it was more or less, as you came into the stadium, right opposite there were the visiting and the home team. But now it's moved down closer to the concession stand in that area, yeah. But I could say, remember managers, Tony Lupian, Marv Olson, and I was talking to my friend John Yacom yesterday, and John was saying that Marv Olson is still living, apparently still out in the Dakotas, there's where he came from. And I learned something the other day, and maybe you know this, that Riley, the former coach now of the Knicks, his father was a manager at Bradford. Now, back in the early 40s, he was the manager at Bradford. And there was great rivalry between Bradford and Jamestown. Olean and Jamestown.
They used to throw roofing nails at us.
Yeah, that was tough.
Geez, you better believe it.
I forgot to touch on one thing, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else. But I did also, after the Kerners left, Harold Love took over the concessions. Harold Love owned the Humidor, and I worked for Harold and his wife, Alice Love, who was a very big in the local bowling establishment here. Well, Alice Love and we got fired many, many times by Harold. And for little or no things, we got fired. And his favorite was saying every time was, "God Almighty, Alice," or "God Almighty, Kinky." And we catch the brunt of the whole thing. But they also ran the concessions in Olean for a short time. And we would have to ride, Paul Palmieri and I rode down in Eugene Love's old Studebaker. I think it was Studebaker, in the trunk. And we got just outside of Salamanca, and there was a stick holding up the trunk. And we hit a bump, and down come the trunk, right down on our heads. But we had to Eugene brought all the supplies down, all the things they were going to sell in the back of that car at the old Bradner Stadium. And of course, eventually Harold Love became the owner of the Hornell Ball Club for a year or two. I think he lost his shirt there. But I have very fond memories. I'm so glad that, I guess if I hadn't lived that close to the ballpark, I might not have been involved in what I've been telling you about. But it was great years, and I just hope that baseball continues here locally.
Were you in awe of Johnny Newman?
Yes, I got to know him better after he made his home here, because he ended up driving local bus. But he was a big fan. The fans loved him. Of course, every time he came up, you wanted to see a home run, and a lot of times you did. But he was the Babe Ruth of the Pony League at that time. And maybe if he'd been younger, he might have gone higher. But it was during the war years, and I think that affected a lot of ball players. I guess maybe that's about all I have to add. I do have some clipping, or some things I don't know if you want to use them or not. There was, we got one year, Detroit sent down some old usher uniforms to Jamestown. And the late Hank Johnson, Henry Johnson, and myself had to put those on. They were dark blue, heavy things with a yellow stripe down the side. Hated to see those things. Otherwise, we wore regular clothes, but they came, and oh, they were brutal. So we wore them for a couple of years, and finally, I think we convinced them that we didn't want them. But that's that, and so I'll pass that. You can have. Looks like the Magna Carta is in better shape than that is, but.
Kinky, remember the night that the fog rolled in down there on numerous occasions, and they turned the lights out and raised the fog so they'd go ahead and finish the ball game?
Right.
And Handlebar Sherman, wasn't it?
Yes.
That stole second base.
Stole second base. Right. He went out there and stole second base during the dugout.
And nobody recognized it until the guy got on first base and started to steal second base.
Yes,
And the bag looked
the bag was gone. Bag was gone. Yes.
Hey, I'll never forget that.
Once in a while, I ended up being the visiting team bat boy. And the name of the manager escapes me now, but it was Wellsville that was playing. And Jamestown was behind, and they rallied and won the game eventually, but they got ahead. And I was in that visiting team dugout cheering for Jamestown. Well, the manager threw me out. He fired me right there. He was most upset. Pardon?
Tom Carey, hot-headed.
Yeah, that's who it was. That's who it was. Yeah, he fired me right there. So I've been fired twice in baseball.
Is that Hank Johnson that played first base for the Faulkner Independents in the late 20s when they had Stacy Ross?
It could be, because Hank, and then he ended up working at the Humidor back in the early 50s. But, he's gone now, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it is.
They had a Rabbit Swanson from Warren, too, and it's even Budweiser short.
Yeah.
He played with the old Spiders.
Yeah, I'm sure that's who it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where did the players hang out?
Oh, back in the mid-40s and that, there was Ritz Restaurant, which is over here now. The restaurant's still there, but that was a big hangout. And back in the early 40s, wasn't there a place at 3rd and Main up above Clark's? There was a restaurant up in there. I can't think of the name.
Well, they had, when we had spring training down there, they used to feed us at the Buffalo Grill.
Buffalo Grill. Do you know that's the oldest building in Jamestown? Buffalo Grill?
Yeah.
Oldest building
On
in
the corner
Jamestown.
of Buffalo
and Second, right?
Right there.
Yeah.
They used to feed us our meals. Of course, I didn't eat many of them there. I ate at home. See, but the rest of the guys would eat there. And then they'd get up to the Humidor, and they'd all gather around there, and everybody knew it, and so...
Yeah, Humidor was another gathering point for the ball players. Now, I don't know how many went down where your dad worked at Gunnard and Carlson, but Humidor was a big hangout for the ball players. I mean, of course, then you had the 8-team leagues, 8 teams in each league, and everything came in by ticker tape, and they had the big scoreboard and marking the scores down. So that was quite a focal point for the ball players as well.
A lot of the guys lived upstairs.
Lived upstairs, above the Humidor, and there were
Humidor,
apartments.
behind the Humidor,
Yeah.
those old apartments.
Yeah, yeah.
About a half dozen of them at least.
So like I say, they were great years, and I don't regret one bit. So I hope I've added a little
Oh,
bit to your
perfect.
history.
Big
And I have one more picture, and that's kind of bad, but it's Cedric Tallison, the slim fellow. I don't know who that is. Of course, Cedric is gone now, but he was great to work for as well.
What, he got involved in that controversy in St. Petersburg, didn't he?
Yes.
Now, whose side was he on, the winners or the losers, or, well, there aren't any real winners there yet, because they,
Maybe Jerry Lawson can say, because you,
I don't remember which side he was on, to tell you the truth. All I know is that he was involved very strongly in that thing, and I don't really know, but I don't think it's settled.
no.
no. Of course, Cedric is gone now as well.
Yeah.
But he was great to work for.
Do you have any recollections of a guy, I really haven't heard anybody talk about Bob Shockey?
Well, Bob Shockey was when he managed, he was the only non-playing manager in the league that year. And he had to be 55, 60 then, at least.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, because he played with the Yankees back in early 20s, late 1920, and so this is what, 30 years later that he's done managing, and he couldn't have been a young man when he got out of baseball. But Bob Shockey he was almost could have been grandfather to some of these kids, or at least an older father.
Yeah.
He was I didn't know him too well. Marv Olson and I think Tony Lupien were my two favorite managers. Yeah.
They mentioned something about Shock. He just didn't get along. He didn't communicate with people. Just kind of his own.
Yeah.
He
he
was
was.
very hard at the radio station. It was very hard to get him to be on and to be interviewed or do
Yeah.
anything. I don't think he liked it in Class D baseball at all.
No, I think that's the feeling I got too.
But he, by the way, just as an aside, Bob Shockey was the guy who pitched the first game when Yankee Stadium was rebuilt, the house that Booth built.
Right.
Shockey was the guy.
Yeah.
So he's got a big footnote in baseball history. Well, thank you very much. This is
Well, thank
terrific.
you. Nice being here.
I'm Gunnard Kindberg, or Gunnar Kindberg.
Was vintern till sommaren dagon och hälsa dig med blommig hatt. Jag tror på dröm om sommarhus med täppa och med lindas sus. En speleman med sin fiol och luften fylld av kappret full.
But it's a song that it's sending greetings back to people in Sweden. Hälsa dem där hemma. Ja, varsågod.
I den stora höstarna får jag köpets rast under himlens stjärnor. Man får pås mig snart. Efter lång och strävan dag hör jag fjärran vingeslag. Svala stad som återgår mot nord och ljus mot norr.